for your loan, your house. So I don't know.
But I don't.
No one has a clue.
I think the difference here is we don't really have the subprime mortgages. Whereas, we had the Credit Act, and I mean, you've actually got to prove to the bank quite a lot before you can get a. Whereas in America, they would actually just lend, without being able to prove.
That is a very good point. And yes, you're also bearing in mind though that yes, subprime mortgages were a major problem. By the way, subprime mortgages, lending to people who can't afford them in order to keep this afloat. That's what subprime means. That didn't happen in this country. However, it doesn't mean to say that the same can't occur in other things like personal loans or other forms of microfinancing. Just because it happened in America with subprime mortgages doesn't mean it can't happen in other things. I can tell you now that Standard Bank have got well, let's not. I won't go into specific details, but there are banks who are preparing. Remember, the securitization is this big in the country, for however big it is, but the propensity and the preparation for more securitization can be this big. So just because, in other words, what I'm saying is that there are certain securitizations that are coming, that are being signed now, deals that are being signed now, that I believe could have that effect. But the question we need to ask ourselves, is securitization happening behind our backs without disclosing to us, then forcibly quickly selling our assets as quickly as possible to get the cash to keep putting into the system? Is that something we should be aware of, or told about, or disclosed? That for me is number one. It's about the disclosure issue. Because I personally believe that if we can get out of this banks lending money in places where it's just purely to keep a system going versus sustainability, alternative energies, organic farming, all that kind of things, the stuff that we should be doing, then our life can start to change quickly. All right, that's what I'm excited about. And to answer the other question about why do I do this, that's the second reason. Sustainability. Yeah, in the back.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say on that very valid point about reckless lending, that in South Africa, the National Credit Act only came into effect in 2005. So all bonds and everything else, home loans that were taken before that, were not held to that standard of reckless lending. If somebody cannot afford it, and so it's a very recent thing in 2004. And prior to that, our system operated exactly the same as everywhere else around the world.
And you'll notice that there's a time lag between the problem starting and then us doing something about it. That's 2004, like you said. It's only now has it really been before Parliament. What is that, 8 years later? What's happened subsequently since then that we still don't even know about? This is where where the big problem. Again, it comes down to one simple thing. The size of the derivatives market is 20 times larger than the GDP of the entire planet. That statistic alone makes us need to ask serious questions about what's going on.
What is the size of South Africa's derivatives?
I have no idea. They don't even know how big the worldwide is. It's purely estimates. They say it's between, I think, 800 trillion and 1.4 quadrillion internationally. They don't know. No, they don't. It's literally it's a black hole of.
It can't be added up.
2009, South Africa had the biggest single stock futures market in the world.
Biggest single what?
2009, South Africa had the biggest stock futures market in the world. Single stock. Okay, in the world. Can you explain that quickly?
It's a derivatives market, obviously, but it's single stock futures is a product that was developed principally out of contracts for difference, but they specialize in that particular product in South Africa. So they basically have the largest market of that particular product in the world in South Africa. And as a consequence of that, when they had the big blowout in 2008, banks lost between 3 and 5 billion rand in that market alone when it crashed.
So South Africa is not completely off the map, guys. Another comment?
To bring South Africa back to the fore, the South African Reserve Bank was one of the first 5 reserve banks created in the world, right behind the Fed Reserve. We're not an isolated banking system. We apply the same thinking and forward thinking of the monetary system as the US. And secondly, it's unlikely that any of us sitting here today have bought furniture from Russell's. But if you want to talk about subprime and manipulation of markets, we have a huge number of chain stores selling goods to people that they know are not able to fulfill their thing. It's hidden or it's similar, just a different face.
That's also a very good point. So the idea is that this is just a concept. It's the fact that it's happening big. What is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back? We don't know. But rest assured, there's something quite large and sinister. And thanks, guys, for bringing that up, because it's important to realize that, when everyone says, "Oh, don't worry about you in South Africa, everything's fine," we need to start. We know that's not true.
Sorry, can I ask a question here? There are newer banks that are coming through, like Capitec. Do they work in the same fashion, or have they got some other thing happening?
The question was, there's newer banks coming in. Do they work in the same fashion? The simple fact of the market is you can't compete as a bank unless you do this stuff. If you've got all your competitors are getting involved in something that's making them a fortune and getting away with it, whether it's illegal or not, you won't survive unless you do it. That's the way I look at it. So I would say highly likely. I mean, it's all essentially the same. Sorry, yeah, in the back?
Sorry, Scott, just to add to that, this is about how far we into it as well. I've been for years been involved in the segment market, bridging finance, which is really quite small stuff. But what we found happening with the Credit Act is all the guys just start cheating. So the banks are just ignoring. I can. Most of you here in this room tonight, I can do your credit score for you, and let's take the ones, let's say that you shouldn't really, according to the Credit Act, get more. I'm going to get you 300 grand at African Bank or Capitec or something right now, just a personal loan, easy. Even if you're blacklisted, even if you're an ITC. And in fact, if you read the papers now, that's now, people are talking about, everybody's nervous about the scope of unsecured lending that's going on, because that's what they're doing now. All they're doing is lending money to people with no assets, let alone subprime assets. So it's just that whole thing's explained.
Interesting. Yeah, so we can start. Last question, then we carry on.
The term derivatives.
Oh, what is a derivative? A derivative is really almost like a bet that's placed on something that has a link to a specific asset. So like a house or a share price or a share option, etc. So it has a link to a certain underlying asset. But the way that I look at a derivative, and again, I'm not in this market at all, I've just learned from my own research, it's really a bet. It's like a casino. What will happen to that asset? And it gets hugely complicated, because I've heard that the original derivatives market was created by after the World War II, the top scientists and physicists didn't have much better to do, so they literally came up with incredibly complicated and sophisticated ways of making money. And that's essentially what their brain power was put to, which is, interesting to say the least. But we're talking about, it can get really, really complicated, and it talks about all kinds of interest. Definitely last question.
Just as a matter of interest, you can buy the derivative on a bet basis that it's going to go up, and you can buy it on the bet basis that it's going down. You can gain on both sides of the scale.
Yeah. Well, that's what they were doing. And when we start looking about what the overseas banks do is they play both. What they would essentially do is they would sell derivatives to their clients and then bet on them losing. So they would make the commission on the sale, but at the same time bet on the fact that they were going to go down. And I've actually had conversations with people in this country that essentially what was happening is that these guys basically operate in a back office. It's probably more regulated by now. I don't know. I'm not in the industry. Maybe some of you guys in the industry will know more than that now. But what was essentially happening is if you go into a stockbroking firm and you say, I'd like to buy 100,000 of IBM, they'll go, sure, here's your 100,000 of IBM. But they don't actually sell you the shares. What they do is they wait a couple of days. They'll take the risk, wait, because they know that IBM's going to go down. So they just wait a few days, and then they can make their money on that. Again, I don't want to start speculating too much, because this is now outside of my area of expertise now. And I don't want to start, giving you the impression that I know a lot about this industry and the trading markets. I don't really understand that. But it's more just to give you guys an understanding. All right, point 8. Banks do not use money. They use negotiable instruments. Here we go. These instruments are clearly defined in the Bills of Exchange Act and have been used by trading merchants for thousands of years. It is a constitutional right of every South African to have an explanation of how our instruments are being used, traded, and exploited by the banks. Basically, it works like this. When there was no gold and silver backing money anymore, the only thing that exists, not money, is promises to pay money. Now, a negotiable instrument is literally a piece of paper like this, that says, I promise to pay so-and-so or the bearer a certain amount of money. Signature. Just now we heard monetizing signatures. This is what the banks do. They take this instrument, and the reason why it's called a negotiable instrument is it's not a negotiable in so much as you negotiate a price for it. It's negotiable as in the ship negotiates. It moves. The physical piece of paper and the document starts moving. That's why it's a negotiable instrument. So if you couldn't get close to a bank, merchants used to draw promissory notes and bills that they could then endorse to other people. They used to trade with pieces of paper instead of actually lugging around gold. So pieces of paper became easier. So what the banks then did was they said, well, why bother with gold or anything at all? Let's only go with promises. And that's essentially what has happened. Now, this is a little bit advanced. Well, it certainly was for me when I first started looking into it. But what I'm going to tell you here is, for me, one of the more interesting aspects about our monetary system. This is a court case, Stanek versus White, in America. Now, this is important because, remember, there's no money, only promises to pay money, right? So, if you have a debt to be repaid, you can't pay it because there's no money to pay it. You can only promise to pay it or provide promises to pay it. Are you with me? I know it sounds nuts, but that's essentially what we're talking about here. So, in this court case, it said, there is a distinction between a debt discharged and a debt paid. Okay, you can't pay a debt, you can only discharge the obligation that's been put on you to pay it. Are you with me? So in other words, you've got an obligation now to meet a certain requirement. It doesn't have to be a bank debt, it can be anyone's. You've got to pay for goods or anything received. There's an obligation. You cannot pay that debt because money no longer exists to pay it. All you can do is you can discharge the obligation so that that person doesn't come after you. Are you with me? No. Okay, it's not quite.
And how? That's the question.
Okay, let's say, for example, I buy your shoes from you. Okay, so I take your shoes, and I now have to give you some money. Okay, I can't pay for those shoes because, as I've shown, there's no money left. There's no gold or silver. I can only give you a promise to pay money, which you think is money, but is not really money. But you're happy with that because that's the way everybody works with it, these promises. I have not paid for those shoes. I've just discharged the obligation to you so that you're not cross with me and come after me with a stick to collect your money for buying your shoes. Yeah? Not yet.
Can we take that same note and give it to somebody else in exchange for something else?
Yes, but it's not, what I'm saying. The point that I'm trying to make is there's no money. There's only the promise. So I can if I do a transfer into your bank account or give you banknotes, those only represent promises. In fact, our banknotes don't even represent promises even more. They don't even have a promise to pay the bearer on demand anymore. They don't even have that. They're not even promises. They're worthless pieces of paper, except for the mind believing in it. Okay, so the point that I'm trying to make is let's just assume everything's a promise anyway, because remember, this piece of paper could only be printed if it had a debt obligation associated to it. So banks bought it from the Reserve Bank or whatever, and there's a process called seniorage, which I won't get into now. But there's a process that happens behind the scenes. So even a note still has a promise of a debt attached to it. So if I hold up a 200 Rand note, somebody owes that 200 Rand to pay it off. Which means if you're sitting with money in your bank account and no debt, you're actually holding a device that literally holds certain people to slavery to pay it back because they want to get that money from you. Does that make sense? Because it's a debt instrument. Everything that you're holding is a debt instrument. So I now have to pay for his shoes with a debt instrument. So he says I have a debt to him for his shoes, and all I can pay to him is his debt is with another debt. So one debt instrument is used to pay another debt instrument. There's no money, physical gold coins or anything tangible, which means that I'm using a debt to pay a debt. I can't pay his debt. I can only discharge the obligation that I have to him for that debt, but the debt still remains. To carry on with what it says here, there is a distinction between a debt discharged and a debt paid. When discharged, the debt still exists, though divested of its charter as a legal obligation. So there's no longer a legal obligation, okay? During the operation of the discharge, something of the original vitality of the debt continues to exist, which may be transferred, even though the transferee takes it subject to its disability incident to the discharge. So essentially what's happening is, try and put this in plain English the way that I see it, I can't pay you for your shoes. I can only give you a debt instrument. But because I'm paying one debt with another debt, the debt actually still remains in the system, festering. And every time a transaction gets made and we use money to pay, so-called pay for things, but it's not really paying for it, the debt still exists in the system. And it starts to fester and grow and grow and grow and grow. And because of the exponential curve, it's growing to the point where weird things are starting to happen, and we're starting to see flaws within the system because of this fact. In actual fact, we can't pay for anything. I know it sounds ludicrous. Do you see where I'm getting at? Sorry, in the back there first.
I think, well, just a question that I think it is dangerous and it might actually undermine the case you're making. I think it's more helpful to see money as rights, figures in the banks, whatever. What rights do you have, what claim do you have on resources? And those are transferred. Numbers, your account are transferred to my account. And it's real. Money is not it's a spiritual reality, in other words. I think it's the notes, etc. As we saw, it's 3%. And that money, I believe, is debt-free. That's the other 97%, as you rightly say, is burdened by debt. And if you look at total money supply, the total amount of debt is very much equivalent to it. So the problem is real. The whole monetary system is debt-based. But that money functions as a real transferring of rights among people. But the real issue is who manipulates the system so that they benefit unduly and unjustly at the expense of everyone else.
It's a very valid point with regards to what money is, and it's a transferring of rights, and it really is. I have the right to this, I have the right to send a sheriff to your house if I have this particular piece of paper. And again, I didn't want the purpose of this to be what is money and what should we do with it in the future. That's not what this is about. It's a very fair point. I mean, we need money. Just one thing about your 3%, the fact that 3% is not debt-based. You need to look up seigniorage. It's called seigniorage. It's how the Reserve Bank prints notes and then basically lends it off to the commercial banks. Believe you me, there's an obligation attached to those notes as well. It's not all just debt-based. But I understand your point. The point is, do we go back to a currency that is based on something? What is the future? I'm not here to answer that question today. I'd love you guys to go and talk about it on your own. That's really cool. What I'm just trying to get you to do is give you enough information to make really, really informed choices. Even what I'm saying now is really controversial in terms of normal banking kind of systems. I mean, it's not the kind of thing most people would stand up and talk about. This is the way I do it because it is a large degree of opinion, which is why I encourage everybody to go and do this on their own and research it. There was a quick question. Sorry, someone?
If you look at a surety, which is not part of a major agreement or agreement that and the transferability, you talked about having a liability of a debt and discharging the onus under that debt. So you may discharge, but the liability doesn't go away. The point of sureties is very, in a South African context, is very valid in that point, because sureties don't apply just to that one particular debt. They apply to many debts.
Yeah, that's true.
And they continue. They are in continue. And when they're without quantum, they can be applied to any amount. So, to illustrate your point, under obligations that exist once the alleged debt is discharged, no, those obligations don't go away. For example, if you signed a surety in 1960 and you settled the debt in 1970, that surety is still valid today.
This is the kind of thing. Thank you. Beautifully put. Sure. Good audience. You guys are helping me out a lot. Turn the camera that way. Exactly. You're starting to see it. And it's nice because everyone's got little pieces of the puzzle. And as we start putting more pieces of the puzzle together, yeah, did you want to mention something? No. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry, the guy behind you. Oh, no. Did you want to answer something?
About the security with the banks. You must, when you have repaid your bond on your house, your mortgage, you must ask for the security back and get a letter from your bank to say that they hold no securities of any kind with you.
Yeah.
And you can do that, and I have got that.
Good. No, that's extremely important, because what it also does is it starts to cut the chain of the derivative and what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe there's nothing there, maybe there is. But you're right, you need to have that security. As time goes by, as the more we start digging, I'm even concerned that even if you do have that, it's not 100% certified. But I don't want to go into too much detail on that, because agreements are interesting things. You can bring up agreements from far away and suddenly say, oh, we have this old agreement, and does that supersede? And suddenly there's certain rights. It gets very complicated. But we're talking about this concept of instruments and negotiable instruments. And there's really two types of negotiable instruments. One is a promissory note, which is what I showed you about before. It's literally a piece of paper. You can take a piece of paper on a napkin, and you can write there, I promise to pay so-and-so X amount of money, or the bearer, da-da-da. That's essentially money. But because we will not accept it amongst each other, we've got to go to a bank to what's called discounting. And the word discount is not what it means to a bank as it does to us. It literally means, I guess you could call it, converting it into something of value. Now, just to give you an idea of how negotiable instruments work, and a negotiable instrument law has been described by top law professors like Leonard Kieran, Milan, etc., as being notoriously difficult. The basic understanding of the geometry behind this is being called notoriously difficult. So I'm going to just give you the very basics, because it's important to realize that when you sign a piece of paper, that may well be converted into money of some sort, or get traded, or converted into some right somewhere along the line, and get used without you even knowing about it. So I'm going to. This is why I want to start going into this. Now, if you actually even have a look at the South African Reserve Bank Act, Section 10, it even says the bank may, subject to provisions of Section 13, buy, sell, discount, or rediscount bills of exchange drawn or promissory notes issued for commercial, industrial, or agricultural purposes. So the concept of discounting commercial paper or discounting negotiable instruments, I know this is always difficult to present, because you've got different people on different levels, and a lot of people look at this with like a bit of a blank stare. It basically means you can take one of those pieces of paper on a napkin, take it to the Reserve Bank, and they'll basically give you cash for it in exchange for that note. Do you see what I'm saying? It's a part of the money creation process. This is the way that I see it. So, if you have a look at, when we start looking at checks, right, it says, in fact, in South African court case, 1996, Allied Trust and Cupido, Judge Conradi said, the fundamental purpose of a negotiable instrument is to be freely negotiable, to serve, in effect, as money. Okay, now if you look at the Bills of Exchange Act, where the only definitions of negotiable instruments exist, promissory notes and bills of exchange, the definition of a promissory note is very simple. Person X, okay, promises to pay person Y a sum of money, or to the bearer. That's all it is. Do you see what I'm saying? So that little piece of paper suddenly becomes in effect as money. Now it gets quite complicated when you start talking about the liquidity behind the bill, because the conventional people who understand this kind of stuff will say, no, but it needs to be paid back in order to become liquid. But hopefully I'm already giving you some interesting food for thought that you can't pay a promissory note back, because the only thing that exists in our money is promises. So what's the difference? Is this promise or this promise or that promise or that promise? And who knows what you're paying back with? I'll pay that promise with this promise. And there's nothing ever going to be redeemed from the system. There's no good that can ever come out of it. It just carries on growing and growing and growing perpetually. So he says the fundamental purpose of a negotiable instrument is to be freely negotiable, to serve in effect as money. South African Reserve Bank is a signatory to the Reform on the Bills of Exchange Act, which was adopted at the UNCITRAL Convention in 1999. Just to give you an idea, the Bills of Exchange Act in South Africa was adapted from the Bills of Exchange Act in the UK. It's almost word for word. And it just happens to be identical almost all around the world. All the way as far as India, Australia. Why would India have the same bills of exchange as we do?
Commonwealth country.
Annexed by the Palms, basically. Now what happens is, basically what would happen is the British system of money, they would go in, they would conquer, sure, they would get their independence, but they left behind the monetary system. Thanks, we still own your country. So essentially, look at what's happened. This same principle of understanding what money is starting to, it's become a one-world currency. It always is a one-world currency. People say the Illuminati are going to come up with a one-world currency. We already kind of do have a one-world currency, and they operate on this sort of level. Now, there's lots of laws and regulations that deal with how this is operated, but the fundamental basis is the same. So, it says on page 25 of this, this is from the South African Reserve Bank, which was adapted in the UNCITRAL Convention of 1999. On page 25, it says, bills and notes are commercial paper money. So now we know what money is. There's your definition of money. Bills and notes. What are bills and notes? Well, I told you a note is a promissory note. Piece of paper, I promise to pay XYZ on a piece of paper. That's a promissory note. That is commercial paper money. Is that weird or what? Okay, so when you take it to the bank, they discount that note. And they turn it into money which we think is money, which we all trust each other now to use and accept. The problem is the trust in that is now falling, which is why we have some problems. Now, is everyone comfortable with this? Because now I'm going to take a big leap of faith. Is everyone happy with the promissory note? Someone at the back there?
Question about that, because if you don't have the money or you can't borrow it, in other words, if it doesn't exist somewhere in the system already, how can you promise within the reality? So, in the end, doesn't it come back to all money is created through bank credit?
Yes, that's true. All money is created through bank credit.
Not just by saying, I owe you so much. If I don't have it, that promise has no reality.
I see what you're saying. Because we don't trade with those notes anymore, I can't go to a hairdresser and give them a promissory note. I have to now give them another promissory note, which is a bank note, but that's no longer a promissory note. It's just a piece of paper, which we still call a bank note, because we still think that notes and coins exist linked to true money. So, because we don't use it as legal tender. But, from a legal perspective, that's money. Just for somehow the banks have managed to get a monopoly on how they discount these notes. So, which is a fair thing, because none of us are necessarily going to trust each other to buy stuff with these notes. So we have to use a current medium of currency. So again, I don't want to argue whether we need money in the system or not. Michael Tellinger does that beautifully. I'll leave that up to him. What I'm trying to do here is just explain to what money is. Now, there's another kind of negotiable instrument.
Sorry, you asked if we could go on. Can you go over what discount in this means, please? Because I'm not sure.
Well, my understanding of discounting is essentially if I give you a promissory note, if you're a bank, I give you a promissory note, I promise to pay Standard Bank R1 million. You will then discount that and you will give me money in exchange for that. Say, for example, R1 million, the credit. That's my understanding of how discounting works. Yeah? Sell. Okay, yes, all right. Okay, I sell you my piece of paper in exchange for money. So you've just bought my piece of paper. That's what the banks are essentially doing. They're buying pieces of paper with promises written on them, and in return for money, which they created or control. You see what's happening? Is that still getting? Yeah, ha money. Okay, it really is ha money. And it is not to say it doesn't serve a purpose, but it's just weird, because we don't understand what the roles are, and the lack of this knowledge is allowing us to be completely and utterly fleeced on every possible level, including moving private debt onto a public balance sheet. What does that mean? What's the simple, plain English word for moving private debt onto a public balance sheet?
Nationalization.
Nationalization? Okay, another one. Yeah, even one word.
Inflation.
No, what? Bailout. Thank you. It's a bailout. Moving private debt from banks that made up this huge debt, can't pay it back. Who's going to pay it back? Oh, let's hand it over to the government so the people can do it. And what do the people do? You've heard about floating bonds. What is a bond? A promise to pay. Yes. So when you buy government bonds, who's promising to pay that back? The government? The taxpayer. So in other words, when they're selling government bonds, what are they actually selling? Bingo. And with that note, let me show you this short little video clip.
The state of the union is not good.
Our trade deficit.
We must not go back to unwise spending. This is America.
George Orwell once wrote that the great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were, instinctively to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish spurting out ink. You've probably heard confusing phrases like the trade deficit, the falling dollar, the national debt, unfunded liabilities, and so on, which all sound vague and actuarial and vaguely, well, not me. The reality behind these accounting phrases is perfectly monstrous. When someone, a foreigner say, loans money to the American government, what are they getting in return? Well, they are getting promises of interest payments and eventual repayment of the principal. Where does your government get this money? The government is not a business. It does not generate profits in the free market. So where does it get the money to repay its creditors? Are you beginning to understand that it is not dollars that are being sold, or bonds, or agency debt, or treasuries, or anything like that? Where is your government going to get the money to pay off its creditors? It's not pieces of paper, or contracts, or computer bits that are being sold. There is only one thing that the government has to sell. Governments have only one asset that they can use as collateral. Your leaders are selling you. When China lends $800 billion to your government, what they get in return is a guarantee that $10,000 plus interest will be taken from your family at gunpoint and shipped overseas. When a farmer gets a loan from a bank, he uses his livestock as collateral. It is the milk and meat his cows will produce in the future that he will use to pay off his loan. The bank is buying a share in his cows. You are the livestock that your leaders use as collateral. The leaders that you cheer for and throw parades for and drop balloons behind and donate money to are selling you to Chinese rulers, to the Japanese, to the Nigerians, to South American drug lords with accounts in the Caribbean banking centers, to Russia, to Korea, to Egypt, to Colombia, to Chile, to the Philippines, to Malaysia, and anyone else who is willing to give them a few dollars in return for the blood, sweat, and toil of your future. The flag that you praise and the anthems that you sing and the rulers that you weep and kneel before have as much loyalty to you as a plantation owner had to his slaves. And sadly, plantation slaves had more pride than we do. Plantation slaves did not generally praise their master.
Everything is fine. It's all okay, don't worry. Nothing to worry about. Okay, now we're going to start looking at more about this commercial paper money and negotiable instruments. Again, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through this because I really believe that we have to start opening our minds a little bit more to how this stuff works. So I'm going to try and do this quickly, but it is complicated. So I'm going to try and explain it carefully. What happens is when you pay a check, now a check is a bill of exchange, right? You have a promissory note, which is between two people. I promise to pay you. A bill of exchange is different. In a bill of exchange, I order the bank to pay a third party a sum of money. That's what a check is. When you write a check, you order the bank to pay a certain amount of money. Now, what gets really freaky is that, according to my research, and I have nobody who's been able to rebut this properly yet, is that what actually happens is when you order the bank to pay the check, the bank pays the check. Literally. Takes your bill, discounts it, pays it. You've just created money out of nothing. In a separate transaction, oh, by the way, won't you also just debit my account and take money out of my bank account? Therefore providing the illusion that a transfer has taken place? If you have a look at Leonard Huring, who is the Handbook of Negotiable Instruments, which is South African law, Leonard Cohen was an amazing guy who did a huge amount of research into the law of negotiable instruments. He says, with regards to post-dated checks, that they prevent the drawee banker from paying the check and debiting the drawer's account. Not pay the check by debiting the drawer's account. When you give a check to the bank, he doesn't pay the check by removing money from your account, transferring it into another account. He pays the check and then debits the account. Are you with me? No. This contention is made even clearer in Amber's precedents of pleadings, all the South African. If a client issues a check, the banker must pay according to its tenor. The banker must pay according to its tenor, provided he, the banker, is in funds, and debit the account of the client. Are we seeing that there's actually two transactions going on? Remember before I said when you make a transfer, it's more accurate to say that money vanishes from your account and then reappears in the other account? It doesn't transfer. Yeah. So you actually have the power to create and destroy money.
But surely it's a debit and a credit?
Yes, no, it is.
Double entry transaction.
It's a double entry book system, that's correct. But what I'm essentially saying though is, remember though, you could argue that what about just giving them the check and saying, pay this check but don't debit my account. They'll take it as the bill of exchange as an asset, corresponding liability, pay the person, you've just created money out of nothing. That's essentially what we're doing. Oh, but by the way, on the other side of the transaction, won't you just take money out of my account? Now the reason why it gives, remember I talked about it's not a fish. It's a simulated goldfish. It's not a real fish. It's not a real transaction. And a lot of people might not care. So what? It looks real. How many fake plants and weird, what do you call them, like windows that aren't really windows but look like landscapes are there? This synthetic environment that we've been creating, people go, oh, that's really nice. Look, I've got a view of the ocean, but you know we're near the ocean, but you've got a simulated holographic representation of it. Some people are okay with that. Okay, but the point that I'm trying to make is it's important to know that although the end result is the same, what we're starting to learn is just because the end result is the same doesn't mean that the process in order to get there isn't putting us into a little bit of shit. Did you have in the back?
Yeah, I don't think this is a helpful argument. The reality is it functions, and it functions as a transfer of money. Because as you create the money here, you destroy it there. So
okay.
Transfer of money is right. It doesn't really need anywhere to make the goldfish argument. I think it actually undermines your case.
I don't agree, but anyway, I'm going to carry on anyway if that's okay. I appreciate your comment. The reason why it's so important is because one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because what I'm trying to do out of this is we're trying to build alternative energies. There are ways of growing foods and planting, very simple methods that are used in China, terrace farming, all kinds of amazing ways of planting stuff that are fantastic, that are natural. They are not simulated. They don't even use machines. There's incredible ways to get huge amounts of nutrients and huge amounts of yields into specific plants. They don't require the synthetic stuff to be put over the top of it. So although you can get an apple that's come via the process, it looks like an apple, it tastes like an apple, it's just like an acid, it's not real. It lacks the certain, what could you call it? Call it flippin' godlike property or whatever it is. It's got that essence of reality to it. What has now started to happen is the simulation has been created, which we're all going through like zombies to say, oh, the end result is the same, who cares? Oh, it looks like a goldfish, but it's not a real fish. Who cares? It doesn't matter. But from my side, I believe that there's a connection that goes far beyond the synthetic. And unless we start realizing that there has to be some form of pure nature behind everything we do, we end up going to be like the Borg in Star Trek. Resistance is futile. We're just going to become microchipped organisms. I mean, it's funny. I can imagine how many tourists come to this place, and when they get to their house, because it's quite difficult to find their little chalet, take a GPS reading, and go, okay, at least now I can find my way back next time. And they literally use the GPS to find their way back to the chalet. You know, this is what is starting to happen. And unless we start accepting the fact, and at least acknowledging the fact that there is a serious, the world's being pulled over our eyes, we're not going to be able to change it. So perhaps it doesn't matter to you, but it matters to me, and maybe there's one more person in the audience who it does matter to, and in that case I'm talking to you.
Money is a virtual reality at this stage, by and large, and it works as such. actual reality, values are not material. A lot of material things have value, but a lot of the things that we buy and sell using our money rights are not material. A large part of every modern economy is services, for example. And there are all sorts of other values that don't have any material component to them. I think we have to think in that way to understand what's really happening.
No, look, I agree, and I'm definitely, I believe in that, and I'm happy to go along with it. Yeah.
Scott, I'm trying to listen to both sides, and the distinction between a medium of exchange that represents value for value is different to the money and the monetary system that has been created.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if a check does disappear money at one side and appear in another place, there are two journal entries, both sided. That the asset has been taken and traded off, that is two journal entries. And then they recreate an event with myself to take money out and gain a second entry. So it is a complicated, but it's the monetary system, and what you call money is no longer simply a medium of exchange, like a talent or a shoe, there's a value possibly behind it, and we've lost that direct link to the value.
So where does a knife become a sword? Money's not the money. It is a weapon of financial mass destruction. That's why, because remember, we know our money all comes from debt anyway, and that's being used to put guns to people's heads and say, you'll pay it back, or else.